Mike Craven, college football editor, senior writer for Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine, joins us on 365 Sports. Craig Smoke, Paul Catalina, and David Smoke. We'll get to his book that he's written about the guide to Texas college football. Mike, thanks for your time. I saw your note on the SMU flip of Ty Hawkins from TCU to SMU, and I got to read this. No one under 50 remembers SMU fully operational, and I'm not sure where it goes, but I'm interested.
Yeah, I grew up in a household, I had an uncle that went to SMU. He ran track there in the 80s, and, you always hear the stories. I was born in 1985, so, I don't remember when they were really good. And if you were born in 1980, you probably still don't remember when they were really good. And so, you kind of always hear about the Pony Express, and you see the documentaries, and you see them that they won a national championship in 82 and 83, and you know about the Southwest Conference. But none of us have seen it. Most of us have never seen it. And now, when they're allowed to use their money to kind of money whip these players and get this roster going, and it's not even illegal anymore. They're in a power conference, and, TCU didn't want that. It's just going to be something that is going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be one of the fascinating storylines in the state and even in the country, just what SMU is and what the ceiling is now that they're allowed to kind of put their money where their mouth is.
Mike, I was born in 1980, so by the time the death penalty had come down, it was right when I would start watching football with my dad. So, yeah, I don't know it either. I think, especially given, say the ACC loses a couple teams but manages to stay together, they're on some pretty good footing to take a jump in that league pretty fast.
Yeah, let's say ACC loses Clemson, Florida State, Miami. What remaining program in that conference would you pick in 10 years to kind of be, ready to have more success in new look college football? Like, we're moving to where, it's always been this way, but money is king here. Like, your ability to raise money through television revenue, through your conference, and then also through your donors and NIL and what goes on in the city. They've done a better job of attaching themselves to Dallas, and they've, awoken a huge donor base that either graduated after the glory days or graduated during and before the glory days that want to help return the program to it. They raised more money last fiscal year during the school year for athletic purposes than any team in the country, full stop. It was something like $125 million they raised from the outside in. I remember being there during the ACC celebration, joining, and Dave Miller, one of their big donors that kind of spearheaded that, looked right at Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated and said, "Hey, it's just a couple $100 million. We're not going to sweat that." And when he said that, you kind of, one, you felt poor, and two, you kind of realized, like, hey, there's an amount of money here that is going to help SMU rocket ship to the top. And as somebody who's approaching 40 years old, I've just never seen it before. I've only heard about it, so it's going to be interesting to see it come back to life again.
Carter Yates wrote a story your company wrote a story about Texas entering the SEC and how A&M had, like, what was it, a 12-year head start, whatever it was. And I know you guys discussed it on your podcast that A&M, when they moved, it was like, oh, my God, it's blasphemy. What are they doing? And they had that long, and then Manziel and company. Your thoughts about now that it's changed and Texas is now a part of it, did A&M take advantage of that head start, so to speak?
They did financially. They were able to catch up with funds. They raise about as much money as Texas. They earn about as much revenue as Texas. Their stadium is huge now. I think it was like 65,000 the last time they played, and now it's 100,000 seat Kyle Field, right? So, I think that they caught up in terms of the arm race, as Carter put it. But there's no denying that they squandered the opportunity to put a stranglehold on the state. Not only did they have the access to the SEC, which allowed them to recruit, and they have the money to buy the best recruiting class in the history of 24/7 sports, right, in 2021, and to buy Jimbo Fisher and all the things that they were doing. And also, while Texas wasn't good, like in the history of Texas and Texas A&M and that rivalry, I think out of the 114 or 12 years they've all played football at the same time, there's only been 6 where they've each won 9 games in the same season. Like historically, when one is good, one is bad, and when one is bad, the other one is good. A&M had a chance to, take the money, take the recruiting, and go win football games and really become their own identity. And now you look up and Texas is better, right? I mean, on paper, Texas is going to be favored in that game at Kyle Field, despite the 12 years of mediocrity, despite the 12 years of A&M having, the SEC as the flagship program in the state. And it's got to feel like a wasted opportunity if you're an Aggie.
Mike, 12 years of doing that, but also, I mean, credit to Texas for being able to strike while the iron was hot, because when they made the decision to jump into the SEC, I think most of us were like, well, good luck with that. And clearly they made all the right decisions in the right order.
I don't think it's a coincidence that, Texas was doing really good in all these sports, and then DeLoss Dodds, their athletic director, retired. They didn't get a couple of the hires right, most notably Steve Patterson. And it kind of fell apart, right? It wasn't just football that was struggling. Basketball was struggling. Rick Barnes left. Baseball, hasn't been what it was, during Augie Garrido and Cliff Gustafson. And they kind of floundered for a little bit. And then they hired Chris Del Conte, who had helped TCU get good at everything, right? Like to go to the Rose Bowl in football and to get a little bit better in baseball. And basketball teams kind of turned the corner with Jamie Dixon. And he's come into Texas and stabilized the whole thing. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that UT sports are kind of waking up again and won so many conference titles on their way out of the Big 12. When I first got into this job, I think I just looked at the football as like, hire a coach gets good players, you get on the football field and you go win games. But it's more than that. The alignment behind the scenes really matters. A&M's had so much turnover. I think they're on their 5th university president since they joined the SEC. Trev Alberts, I think, is their 4th athletic director since they joined the SEC. And that was just 12 years ago. And so until they kind of figure out the top part and stabilize themselves and get a real org chart, I just think that they're going to struggle to be as consistent as Texas does when they get it lined up correctly.
All right. I think when we had you on previously, you mentioned the book, The Guide to Texas, Dave Campbell's Guide to Texas College Football, and it's out. You can pre-order. I think it's available sometime in August. So let's go over this. When was this an idea? How long did it take? And just your thoughts about what makes this one so unique.
Yeah, so this time last year, I started to, this is the kind of, the week or two before media days, you start looking at the schedules and kind of planning out where you think you're going to go. Like what big games you need to circle on the calendar. How are you going to get to as many colleges as you can? Just being in my job, I try to watch at least one game for each of the programs in the state of Texas at the FBS level. And with Sam Houston moving up, they gave us 13 FBS teams in the state. Well, synergy-wise, there's 13 weeks in the college football season, or at least there was last year. So it was one of those like, hey, this can work out perfectly. I can go to a different home stadium every single week. I can map it out to hit each one. And then maybe we can kind of write a book with Texas Monthly kind of, detailing the trip and then also looking at the history of the program. Because I'm a purist, right? I'm not that old, but I'm a traditionalist. I enjoyed the Southwest Conference. I like the regionality of it. I think college football at its core is about beating your neighbor and having the bragging rights to do so. And it felt to me that 2023 was kind of the last year where that mattered. Like we can talk about when that started to decay, and it was probably even before Texas and Oklahoma left. But Texas moving to the SEC was going to cost us 300, games of rivalries in the state between Baylor, TCU, and Texas Tech. And so I kind of wanted just to capture kind of the final moment where college football felt like college football again. And in 20 years, we can look back at the landscape and kind of reminisce on, when the state kind of still had all of these rivalries that we may miss, right? Like Texas A&M and Baylor haven't left since Texas A&M, or haven't played since Texas A&M left. That may be true with Texas as well. And so as somebody who loves the state and at a place that covers the state the way that we do, it kind of just felt on brand to kind of try to capture in time, the last real year of college football in the way that most of us grew up loving it.
I would be shocked, Mike, if the schools that A&M and Texas play in the state, like in the next 30 years, if they get to Houston, Baylor, Tech, or TCU or SMU more than a couple of times. Like they might play Texas State, they might bring in Sam Houston, but I think that they've turned their back on that for maybe as long as they can.
and they definitely aren't going to do it on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd play Baylor at home or Tech at home or TCU at home, but they're not going to travel to those things. And you're seeing that more and more. Like, it's not just Texas, right? Like, TCU's backing out of the SMU game. We're losing a lot of those kind of geographical rivalries that made college football fun. Like, I went to UTSA. Our main rivals are Texas State and North Texas. If our main rival became UAB, I don't know anybody who went to UAB. Like, who am I going to talk trash to? And so that was always what I enjoyed about it, right? Like, I grew up a Longhorn fan because my grandfather worked for the football team. I knew Aggies. They were in my family. They were in my school. They were in my church, right? They were on my football team. You could talk trash. You could have the bragging rights. Like, that was fun, and we're kind of losing a lot of that. And so my goal was just, one, I've always wanted to write a book, and it felt like one I could pull off. And two, it just, it was kind of an ode to college football. I liked the history of it. It gave me a chance to kind of deep dive into each of the programs. It was a lot of fun to do. And to answer your question, it took about a year. It was about July to July. Half of the time writing it, the other half just designing it, editing it, getting with the SIDs and making sure that you're not saying anything dumb in there, that type of deal. So it was a long process for sure.
Well, I just put the link up to a tweet you put up about the book, and they can pre-order limited edition copy today. So hopefully people have a chance to take advantage of that. Mike Craven with us, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine.
Mike, do you have an underrated city or just campus or, something along those lines, maybe even a restaurant in a certain place, but is there kind of an underrated aspect to some of your travels that maybe people don't talk enough about?
I don't think people enjoy El Paso as much as they should. For my money, El Paso is the best big city in the state, right? Like, you're close to great food, great people. There's not as much traffic. There's 3 national parks within an hour and a half of driving distance. I always enjoy my trips out. You're in mountain time. It just kind of feels like a different vibe than anywhere else in the state. I enjoy El Paso a lot. I think Lubbock. Maybe I shouldn't say this on a Waco podcast or a Waco radio show here.
No,
but I think,
by the way, Mike, we're coast to coast. We're in Waco, but we're much different than like we're just doing Waco stuff. So go ahead.
I just don't want to get any hate mail here over my Lubbock take. I think Lubbock is an underrated college town. Like I don't know if I'd live there for 10 years or anything like that, but every time I go to Lubbock, I enjoy it. It's a cool college town. Texas State's also up there. San Marcos with the river running through. It's a beautiful college town. I guess I kind of like the cities that kind of are built around the colleges. And then El Paso just kind of comes down to my love of national parks and Mexican food.
Well, yeah, there you go. I think I'm going to make my first trip out to Lubbock for a football game this year. So that's the plan when Baylor plays out there. I think we're going to go, and I hope that Smokey and Craig can come with me, depending on when their high school game ends and when that game kicks off. Would like to be able to do our show from
I made that trip from West Texas, from Midland, Odessa to Waco, if you remember.
Yeah, I
couple
remember.
of seasons ago. So it's going to have to take me mentally to get prepared.
we did. Yeah. Smokey and I did a Odessa Permian game that was a 3-hour weather delay, and then our flight back to Dallas got canceled before the first Baylor game of the season the next morning. We had to rent a Volkswagen Touareg that almost broke down on us on the way back. It was not a great day.
It was quite the experience. Mike, as far as college football, it's media days. We'll be in Vegas next week, and then all the conferences start to have that. Ought to be fun. Some of these schools that have moved into conferences, we've mentioned Texas and OU, but is there a certain storyline that has piqued your interest, at least for now?
Yeah, I think in the Big 12, like when you saw the media poll stuff come out, the highest ranked Texas team was 9th, and that was Tech, right in front of TCU. And then the all Big 12 media teams, there was Taj Brooks. He was the only, I think Dre McCray as a returner, but Taj Brooks was the only player on those two lists, right? And so it just feels like a year of turnover, especially in the Big 12, right? You got Willie Fritz, kind of a new head coach there in Houston, and what can he do right away? TCU and Tech are entering their 3rd year under a coach, and so a lot of times that's when the players that they've recruited start to kind of step into the limelight. So, like, what will those programs look like? So I guess for me, Dave Aranda on the hot seat and what that means for Baylor. I guess for me in the Big 12, I think what I'm most interested in probably is TCU, right? Like, Baylor's similar to this, like after their first 2 years. Like, are you the losing season team or are you the 12-0 go to the national championship game team? Like, the answer is probably neither, but where are you in the middle of those things? Like, if TCU comes back out and goes 5-7 again, there's some real questions about what that 2022 season meant and if it's sustainable and what Sonny Dykes is going to do there. If they can go win 8-9 games and be in the mix for the Big 12 and, flirt with a Big 12 championship or something like that, then all of a sudden, the Fort Worth, the Metroplex, and TCU maybe becomes, a perennial favorite in the Big 12 or whatever. Like, I just think what TCU is this year is going to give us a lot in terms of what our perception is of the top of the Big 12.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's been interesting with the Big 12. Teams that have, Oklahoma made a run every year, won it almost every year. Oklahoma State's been consistent. Texas had that drought for about 8 to 10 years, but teams have gone on to win it or be right there in the mix in the next year. They haven't been able to sustain it like Texas or like TCU last year and Baylor the year before. Mike, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. Good luck with the book.
Of course. I'll see you all in Vegas.
Mike Craven, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine, the book out on a guide to Texas football. It'll be out in August. I put the link up in the